Hello and welcome. I'm Uncle Badger. I wish you good health, and today I'm going to give a bit of a book review. And this is a book by Tylluan Penry. Sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name. And this is a book published by Wolfenhowle Press. It's The Magical World of the Anglo-Saxons. Yeah. Make sure I've got the title properly. I do hope I got your name right, but I'll put links in the description. There's Tylluan Penry, who has her own channel on YouTube, and also she runs Wolfenhowle Press properly. So I'll put a link specifically to this book on her website, on the Wolfenhowle website. So check the description below if you like this book. She does many others, but today I'll be looking specifically at this book, The Magical World of the Anglo-Saxons, replete with a brooch that I think was found in Sutton Hoo and actually had amethysts from China in, which is, I think, is pretty amazing, saying that the brooch was buried around 650. But that's not what I'm doing a video on today. Today I'm going to have a look at this book, Magical World of the Anglo-Saxons. There we go. Wolfenhowle Press. And Tylluan Penry is kind enough to transcribe the books she does. And that's in Old English, which is the language of the Anglo-Saxons, and she provides a bit of a translation, which I thought was very, very nice. But here we go. This is the first sort of proper book review I'm doing. I'm sure I'll become better with time, and what I'm planning on doing is I'm going to go through this book chapter by chapter, giving a brief overview of what each chapter's about. For more on information within each chapter, of course, get the book. And one of the reasons I do like this book is that it does give a very, very good overview. It allows you to get a very good understanding of the way the Anglo-Saxons would have thought about magic. And like any proper book, we have a note about references and the contents page. And the contents goes onto the next page with an introduction. About Tylluan Penry. Whoopsie daisy. Trying to read backwards. All text seems to show up backwards while filming, but then when I upload it, it uploads the right way around. So if I hold it up, I'm trying to read backwards. But you have a preface, and chapter 1, it looks into the beginnings of who the Anglo-Saxons were, and how they were a group of how the term Anglo-Saxon is more of an umbrella term for many tribes, very extended families that came across from Denmark and northern Germany, and came across to settle in Britain over the course of a good couple of centuries or so, roughly, that is. There we go. And then, after several pages of talking about Anglo-Saxons, who they were, and going into some of the resources we have on finding out about the Anglo-Saxons, some of the difficulty being is they went by oral tradition, meaning they didn't write anything down. They told stories around the campfire. They would ask Grandma, "Where did we come from? Tell us about the gods, Woden. Where did our ancestors come from 200 years ago?" And they haven't survived, and most of the stories that we can get were written down either by the Romans in the 5th century or usually the 5th century. There are earlier references to the Saxons, but mostly also by Christian monks, much later on, from about the year 600 onwards. We have a lot of references written by Christian monks. It's one of the unfortunate things that history was written by the victors, and the Anglo-Saxons weren't the victors in the end. We have bits of references to looking at some of the Roman and Christian texts and stuff. Tacitus's was it Germania by Tacitus, and then I was going to go straight on to chapter 2. Now we do that. Place names. There are several place names in England. Most of this chapter is devoted to it. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 pages, even with bits of illustrations there. And that looks into the place names that the Saxons would have named. Oh yeah, the place names that the Saxons would have named. Yeah, it's looking at the influence that. It's them naming stuff after Tew or Thor or Thunar or Woden. What could they have seen in the landscape that they would have associated with the gods? It's like there are some places that would have been called named after an Old English abbreviation of Thunar's Grove, where priests would have held their services to Thunor in a woodland grove. So you find places still having that sort of connection even today. And it even brought up a local connection in this chapter. There's quite close to me, near Burton-on-Trent, which is a couple of miles south of me, there's a place called Drakelow, Dragon Hill, and it's quite interesting. Drake is dragon, low is hill, and you can see some of the linguistic stuff in that, and it's quite interesting because apparently when they mentioned dragons, they probably would have meant a place that a previous peoples would have used as a holy site or a burial site. With Drakelow near me, they have actually found I think Iron Age cremations there. It would have been a barrow with the cremations inside, and the Saxons would have recognised that. Frobury in Hampshire, meaning Frigg's earthwork, suggesting perhaps that she too was associated with earthworks. Another possibility is that the battle deity Tew was mobile, following the conflict rather than being tied to a specific place. That he was associated with groves, woods and pools. You find several things like that in it. In some cases, when Christianity took over as a more dominant religion, they would have renamed some of the places, normally calling them Devil's something or other, Devil's Hill, Devil's Dyke, specifically if it was a place special to Woden. But apparently the Saxons did that as well. They took previous sacred sites and renamed them after their own deities. But here we go. What the dead can tell us. And I apologise for some of the stilted speech. This is the first book review I've properly done, trying to do a good job for everyone. And we go into what the dead can tell us, and it's mainly to do with burial rites. Some of the burials that we've found would have had burial goods in them, stuff that people would have perhaps have found useful in the afterlife. In several cases, I find that a lot of the graves of the elite, they would have been on a Christian alignment, which I believe is east-west, but they would still have had the burial goods associated with an Anglo-Saxon culture. So there would have been it wouldn't have been the case that there would have been a cut-off date where someone would have stopped worshipping the Anglo-Saxon gods, Thunor, Tiw, and so on, and then suddenly converted full-blown to Christianity. There would have been a crossover. And it's interesting to know what that sort of meant. In some cases, I think that would have been like they would have been hedging their bets, that just in case this new religion of Christianity wasn't quite what was promised, they still could fall back on the older deities that their ancestors would have grown up with. But we find descriptions of what would have been in some of the graves. Looking at what is known as dry deposits. And it's usual grave deposits, small everyday objects like brooches, buckles, knives. Would have shown some of the personality of the person buried. Looking into cremation urns and things like that. At Woodnesborough, which would have been dedicated to Woden, in Kent, circa 1793, about 30 glass drinking vessels were discovered near a large conical hill. Years later, in 1902, a farmer discovered what appears to be a cremation site about 500 yards away. The connection between place name, cremation, and drinking strongly suggests that funeral feasts dedicated to Woden were being held here. So you can sort of start to extrapolate things from that. That there would have been, that in the mind of an Anglo-Saxon, at a funeral they would have had a feast for the dead person's sake, in honour of Woden. And the stuff about the frequent use of the Tiw rune as well on things. But so it starts getting more and more in depth. We go on to chapter 4, Dragons and Weird. Pardon me. Pardon me. I should really cut that out, but I'm not really sure. I'm not really up on video editing. But with Dragons and Weird, we look into dragons, the use of dragons. Nor was the belief in dragons confined solely to heathens, since in 793 the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle recorded fairy dragons flying across the firmament. With hindsight, this was later interpreted as an omen of the coming Viking raid on Lindisfarne. But there's criticising Bishop Higbold in the course of Viking raids. There's a lot of stuff to do with how the monks would have reacted to Anglo-Saxons, and apparently they would have sort of tried to integrate a lot of the Anglo-Saxon customs into the Christian services, and sort of like tried to wend their way across. But it's in some cases the Anglo-Saxon customs still lasted a good 5 or 6, 7, 800 years after the monks tried to sort of suppress that practice by Christianising it. So so it's quite interesting. That's from in here. So it's quite interesting about how stubborn some people can can be and stuff, how things just lodge within the psyche, within the memory, within history. And in this chapter we also get into the weird sisters, sometimes equated to the Roman Fates, the Greek Furies, or the Norse Nornir, Norns. And Shakespeare's The Three Sisters from Macbeth might have been a representation of such weird sisters. And of course there's the Terry Pratchett book named Weird Sisters. We go into what they would have stood for, and what they roughly equate to in other cultures. The young sister, the childbearing sister, and the old sister, and how they would have been looked at. The book goes into an Anglo-Saxon version of them, matronae or martres, who were three mother goddesses. A great deal of archaeological evidence exists for these across northern Europe. There's a reference to Bede. Bede, the Venerable Bede, would have written quite a lot. He's one of the main sources for a lot of this. And there's a reference at the back of this book, reference section at the back of this book, which I'll show later on. The idea of the never-ending thread woven by the Norns, the Weird Sisters, can also be found in Anglo-Saxon, Celtic, Pictish interlaced designs. There's a lot of stuff in a lot of other legends referring to how life is like a thread, and all the life on Earth, the history of a people, is a tapestry of all those threads sewn together. Some of them short, some of them long, which I thought was very poetic. And here we go. But what exactly was the nature of the dragon? Dragons were successful at hiding away, especially underground. Tradition, and it goes into guarding treasure buried underground in ancient mounds. And a reference to Beowulf, and that also links into what I was saying about the Drakelow near me, with the burials in the mound. I don't remember if they actually found any grave goods, but the name Drakelow then would actually sort of make sense if they did find grave goods within it, with the dragon guarding the treasures within. And as we move on, Worm frequently appears in place names too. On the Gower Peninsula in Wales, one can walk along Worm's Head. Cambridgeshire, Nottinghamshire, and so on. And here's the reference to the Drakelow near me. Yeah. But as we go on, conversely, the persistently heathen and successful King Penda of Mercia was a rather embarrassing exception, and that was to Christian gods. I'm trying to work backwards, and there's a reference to King Penda, who eventually the Christian author Nennius rather grudgingly concluded that he was victorious by diabolical agency. And if I'm remembering, it's about that time there would have been a lot of warring between kings trying to remain true to their old pagan ways and trying to resist Christianity. And this would be referencing that. Penda's quite famous anyway. I need to research more on him. There's the film Penda's Fen, which looks interesting, but that's not exactly a historical documentary, but apparently it's very interesting on a folk horror level, but yeah, but with the book we get into heathen kings who died in battle, perhaps at a local sanctuary. If so, then perhaps the clergy feared that venerating a Christian martyr king would be too close to pre-existing heathen practices for comfort. Which sort of shows some of the ancestor worship that is also synonymous with the Anglo-Saxons, which is explained in here. How they lived, and although contemporary Christian author painted a grim picture of the Anglo-Saxon world, it would be wrong to take them entirely at face value. The Anglo-Saxon poem The Ruin probably describes Bath in the county of Avon. Fate has smashed those wonderful walls, this broken city has crumbled the work of giants. The roofs are gutted, the towers fallen, the gates ripped off, frost in the mortar, everything moulded, gaping, collapsed. Thus the maker of men lies waste, this earth crushing our callow mirth, and the work of old giants stands withered and still. The book, as you can just tell, includes several bits of old poetry. It's these two bits that I would have read there, and we go into a look into exactly how, well, the Saxons would have lived, how they would have considered some of the Roman ruins. As the Romans were leaving, the Saxons steadily came in with Hengist and Horsa, who saw off some of the Pictish, were employed to see off some of the Pictish, I think it was Pictish, some barbarous tribes. But they were employed by the King of Kent to see off some of the barbarous tribes, and asked what they want as reward. They sort of, Kent, which part of Kent would you like? Kent. But which part? Kent, all of it. We want all of it. I'm not giving you all of it. Well, we're strong enough to see off your invaders. You weren't. Come on then. So they took over Kent, and that was their first proper acknowledged stronghold in Britain. That was a simplification of what happened, of course. It wasn't just one man talking to himself. As far as the church was concerned, the benefits of converting England to Christianity were material as well as spiritual. When Anglo-Saxon kings converted, they often donated large tracts of land and estates to the church. Had these estates been as wild and worthless as earlier authors suggest, they would not have been much of an offering. So, with that, you can see that a lot of the people, a lot of texts tried to previously make out that England was a barbarous, worthless land filled with raging barbarians and wasn't much fit for anything. So if they were taking the church were taking tracts of land, there must be some value here. References to modern archaeology, and as we go on, we see a reference to the Anatomy of Abuses by Philip Stubbs, about the early and midsummer festivities involving the Lord of Misrule. He particularly disliked the way hobby horses, dragons, pipers and thundering drummers moved around the church and churchyard, where they have commonly their summer hours. Arbours and banqueting houses is set up, and there are, here we go, and you do find that there are references peppering the actual texts. It does reference quite a number of books, but this is a very good composite. It's a very good beginner's guide. A very good. It's a very good beginner's guide to understanding how to understand the Anglo-Saxons, bringing all the several different references from all the historical texts together. I found that it was quite very, very useful to bring the important parts rather than just having sort of a huge stack. I mean, that's about 4 foot off the ground for me, probably even taller. Many original copies of manuscripts, trying to trawl through original Anglo-Saxon versions of the Venerable Bede, trying to find precisely how he saw the Anglo-Saxons. I wouldn't have probably got very far, and it would have taken years and years, as I would have probably have had to have done a PhD, several probably. It's a very good way of sort of quickly, very concisely understanding precisely what we do know about the Anglo-Saxons. But from there, on to chapter 6, more about beliefs and practices. Even Beowulf had been heavily Christianised. And there's things to do with the first missionaries that came across from continental Europe in the late 7th and early 8th centuries. A mention of Northumbrian Saint Willibrord, died 739. Went to preach to the Frisians and founded a monastery at Trier. It does use references. The book does reference material that would have been written about the Christianisation of northern German states, like the northern German tribes like the Frisians, as there would have been some similarities with the Anglo-Saxons of England and the Anglo-Saxons on the continent, remembering that the term Anglo-Saxon is an umbrella term for many tribes. But de ecclesiasticis disciplinis e religione Christiana, by Regino of Prume. The text shows some idea of Germanic heathen practices in Europe and shows several similarities with Bede's earlier comments about the heathen Anglo-Saxons of Britain. So this book does lay down several clues about where to look for further studies, how to cross-reference for if one would want to get complete stacks of original manuscripts like Bede's work, Tacitus, things like that. There was a prohibition one interesting and widespread prohibition forbids burning grains where a man has died. It's possible this was intended to burn away disease and preserve the health of the rest of the household. And there we go. There's talk of the English-born St Boniface took up his axe and personally cut down the Donar oak at Geismar in central Germany, circa 723, just a few years before Bede completed his ecclesiastical history of the English people. And we also see a reference to the Emperor Charlemagne, who destroyed a great tree venerated by the European Saxons. This had been named Irminsul, and local people believed it supported the universe, which also shows that there was a link with the Norse pantheon. Earlier I was mentioning Woden and Thunor being Odin and Thor, and this Irminsul that Charlemagne apparently chopped down is very much like Yggdrasil. So there are crossovers between the two pantheons, between some of the traditions, but as this book goes into, they're not. You can't copy and paste one set of principles into the other culture. There are differences. Even on a regional basis, there are differences. On a personal example, there is a holy well very, very close to me, probably 10 minutes walk from where I'm sat now. In my tower, there's an old holy well, and that would have been, well, it's holy to the Christians, but it would have also been holy to the people here before that, and it's thought it would have been holy even to the Romans, and probably even before that, into the Iron Age and things like that, into the Bronze Age and stuff like that. So, yeah, shows how things progress through time. There's a bit on god oaks. Goes into explain some of the what penitentiaries are, and that's practices that Christian missionaries and bishops would have used to try and better convert their parishioners, how they would better convert the populace, or even sort of laws against repeated laws against practices that still occurred in Christianity that were classed as heathen. So previously heathen practices brought into Christianity that were then outlawed, and that they were trying to properly get rid of. And that's one of the reasons why there's sort of so little about the Anglo-Saxons known. That they were sort of so successfully replaced or integrated into Christianity that most of the original references outside Christian texts or Roman texts, outside of them there's very little mention, and we're basically relying on texts written by the victors or archaeology, what we find in graves. And this puts up some great examples of what we find in these. And I realise I'm not very far in, so I'm probably going to quickly try to speed up a little bit. I don't want to exactly read the whole text out properly. And then chapter 7, we find the title named "The Resistance to Christianity." That goes into a little bit more of what I was saying. There's stuff about the Synod of Whitby in 664. Barely a century before the Battle of Hastings, Abbot Ælfric was warning his flock not to enquire of the foul witch concerning his health, though she may be able to tell something through the devil. Which is, and the fact that he's called Ælfric is a Saxon name. Elf is elf, as in a bit like the fairy, the Tuath De Danann. So here's a heretical name. So as you can see, even a century before the Battle of Hastings, we do still have names harkening back to a previous faith within Christianity. And he says about the witch asking about his health through the devil. But yeah, and it's through these sort of lines that you can sort of start seeing what they did believe. It's sort of by learning what, you can sort of start saying what they don't mention. Yeah, you can start filling in the gaps here. Yeah, so what you can start to, what they do tell is what they want. Yeah, what the Christians want, and you can sort of like what doesn't happen in that case is you can start filling in the gaps. And I know I'm not being very good at enunciating quite what I perhaps mean, but you can start filling in the gaps and stuff by being told what did happen. You can from an opposing side, you can sort of piece together what didn't happen. That was meaning what the heathens did. We have quite a bit about Coifi, with the destruction of a temple, a heathen temple in Northumbria, and we find quite a moderately lengthy account of what happened there. Yeah, it is often worth remembering that blacksmiths were often regarded as potent magicians, and here we also have talks of the Greek Hephaestus, Roman Vulcan, the Anglo-Saxon Wayland. So iron statues would have been regarded as magically powerful. Not exclusively, there are tales of wooden statues of some of the deities used in temples and things like that. Gildas mentions in 504 to 570 mentions those diabolical idols of my country. Although does not name them, he does, however, state that we will see them mouldering away within or without the deserted temples, with skiff and deformed features, as was customary. The use of the word mouldering rather than rusting or crumbling suggests figures made of wood or other organic material. Although Gildas does not say whether the figures resembled human or animal, their stiff and deformed features suggest they were meant to depict something recognisable rather than just abstract patterns. That gives us a clue of what could be used to make statuettes or idols today. It's like sometimes metal or organic material. Chapter 8, Women, Children and Family. Trying to pick out some of the best bits, the most poignant bits. And the stuff about how a child was seen as almost growing up by the age of 7. That they could be, like in the case of Bede, on reaching 7 years of age I was entrusted by my family first to the Most Reverend Abbot Benedict and later the Abbot Ceolfrid for my education. Yeah, it's sort of saying how children were sort of seen. And I think there's stuff in here about with infant mortality being quite high, that it would have been later on that children were, once they'd grown healthy and they would survive into perhaps adulthood, that they were taken more seriously as an actual person and were given more options, which seems to be at the age of 7. And as we go on, we'll find out that 7 is one of the magical sacred numbers, along with 3 and 9, which is quite good. Spears were often buried with boys aged between 10 and 14. There's mention to archery as well. 10 or 11, they began taking part in male-orientated activities of the family and community. Likewise, female-male identity seems to undergo changes at certain ages. Infant girls were often buried with beads, but after the age of 5, their jewellery included disc brooches, suggesting this had become a symbol of her change in status. Her growing up and becoming an actual, an actual living person. Considering child mortality, an actual living person, and more adult. Yeah, and then we go on to changing the gods to mortals and devils. The easiest method of erasing heathen deities was to assimilate them into Christian saints and with similar characteristics. And that tradition is not unique to Christianity. It was popular among the pagan Romans as well. Frey was also sometimes known as Ing. Archaeologists have discovered many weapons marked with the Tew rune. I pointed it out earlier. There we are. You can just about see it in the text there. And I'll try and skip over a lot of stuff. Curing a wise woman curing a grandson of ills. Although she accepted the first bottle of quinine, there is a bit of a spell involving nailing 3 horseshoes to the footboard, and there is 2 versions of the same verse, and it's compared partly where it actually both acknowledges the Holy Ghost as well as Freya, Woden and Loki. So again, it shows the mix between the Christian and the Anglo-Saxon deities as well. Horses and priests. Later in the same work, Tacitus describes how the Tensteri tribe handed down horses as part of the household, with its protecting gods and the rights of succession, suggesting like with cattle in some of the Celtic and Norse traditions, that they would have been seen as a status symbol, that they would have been their wealth, rather than having a number associated with your bank account. How many millions have you in the bank? They would be talking about how many heads of cattle or horses you'd have. So, yeah. And it also mentions Hengist, stallion, and Horsa, horse, who was doing an impression of earlier, about with the conquering of Kent. And again, that was a very brief, simplified version. And we go on. A German tribe called the Nahavali worshipped 2 brother gods called the Alsi. And there is an equivalency with Castor and Pollux. And here's an interesting point that I was hoping to come across as well. Their priests wore dresses like women, and I've thought about that quite a bit. Whether it was just sort of wearing some sort of toga affair that looked a bit like a dress, or a bit like with the more modern priest, they sort of do look like they're wearing dresses, and that was a standard uniform for the priesthood, or whether there was actual sort of transvesticism involved within the priesthood, and there being sort of some sort of, I don't know, like some sort of like gender fluidity within that. Whether it signifies that that may have been the case, I don't know. It would be hard to tell because, as far as I know, that's the only reference to that can be found. That the Nahavali presiding priests dressed like women. That could mean so much. Yeah, and we go on. Hall believes that some cross-dressing men may have been ritual specialists. Yeah, although it does cross with something I was thinking about, how the feminine energy in people, that does seem more closely related to casting magic. Women can create life, as in they give birth, so they are better at creating and birthing concepts. They are better at magic. So magic is more of a feminine energy, perhaps. It's a bit tentative. I think I'm planning on doing a bit more of a study on that. But yeah, it's curious, especially with the Vulpa, some of the magical priestesses of the Vikings who travelled around. They were more highly regarded than a lot of other leaders as well. That was a very feminine thing, and yeah, back in the day, it was rune casting was classed as unmanly. Not necessarily something for homosexuals. There were other things that were unmanly, like involving sleeping with one's wife, positions in bed with your wife. Some of those were unmanly as well. So to say something is unmanly does not necessarily indicate homosexuality. But interestingly does sort of perhaps tie in with it, and the cross-dressing men being ritual specialists. So, yeah, something I've been thinking about. And we go on. A little bit to do with staves with bronze bindings and an iron spike on top. Animal effigies involved, of sheep, goats, or even a crested bird. There even being a cult of the goat, and apparently, book or booker, goat and he-goat respectively, turn up in place names such as Bucklesham, Buckworth, Buckingham, and Bookthrough. Yeah. And we go on to the goddess returns to her temple with her priest. A bit more to do with Tacitus. How and what they celebrate, and there being the beginning of the 4 seasons with dates. And a bit of a calendar with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 major festivals, roughly one a month. And with the importance of midsummer and midwinter. Bede saying that Solmonath February became the month of cakes, where the Anglo-Saxons baked cakes in the shape of birds. That's in February, Solmanath. There's a bit about Bede getting cross-referencing something with the Greek dawn goddess Eos in conjunction with Ostra. Probably incorrect, possibly incorrectly, possibly correctly. And we go on. This is more to do with a lot of the seasonal festivals. We go on to Yule. The wheat cult was particularly associated with Holder, who appears in several guises as old gal or old woman in English folk tradition. And is associated with geese, winter time, and was even referenced in Victorian England when the old woman is plucking her geese. Or in Europe, Frau Holl is shaking her featherbed, meaning it's snowing. Yes, that goes into some of the folk sayings and stuff. Yeah, shaped biscuits being quite important, even during Yule. Chapter 12, Amulets and Charms. Amulets work through sympathetic association using plants, bone, teeth, skin, precious and common stones, and anything considered sacred to an appropriate deity or spirit. The deliberate breaking of items being part of some rituals. Not magic. Wolfenhowle Press also do a book specifically about not magic, which I hope to do a review at some point. There's decorative symbols on brooches, some of them with the shape like running legs. Singing charms over some of the amulets and things. There's an example one here. Variety in magic. Chapter 13 this. Unlucky for some. We go into some of the charms against a sudden stitch. And translating it, referencing mountains, that yonder to the mountain flee, hag who sent this dart. As we move on, it goes into doing cross-referencing some of the crafts. There being within witchcraft, there being some specific specialities, including Goldcraft, the singing or the chanting or singing of spells, Wissecraft, which is witchcraft, Beelacraft, sorcery, Wurtgalstra, plant charmer, Tungulcraft, meaning skilled at reading words which have had a special magical significance, and Wiglung, meaning divination, which also has an association with war as well. Perhaps because before going to battle one would quite know what your chances of winning a battle were before you actually go to war. There's more to do with with the Venerable Bede. Church missionaries found themselves locked in a game of one-upmanship with heathen magic and its practitioners. coming up with many far-fetched claims. Bishop Wilfrid had to teach people how to fish. Yeah. There's Burchard of Worms in Germany. He's referenced quite a lot. There's a little bit about the use of gemstones. Even menstrual or animal blood was included in magical ingredients, along with a tonic drink made from another man's burned skull. So some stuff can, at a quick guess, some stuff can be can also be cross-referenced with Icelandic magic. Some of them can involve cutting different parts of the body and letting the blood from specific parts, or cutting specific parts, like cutting above the heart, and also so if you cut above the heart on my left side, cutting the right toe as well. So it does suggest there could be some relation to between the two magic systems, perhaps. Goes into curses as well. There's only about a page or so on there. It's about a page and a half, 2 pages. There's a little bit on the runes in here. Tylluan Penry has a separate book specifically about the Anglo-Saxon runes, which I'll again hope to review at a later point. But yeah, there is a little bit of a brief look at the runes. About 2 pages worth on the actual runes themselves, with a bit of a look at the alphabet just here. That's specifically the Anglo-Saxon footwork. Again, there is Tylluan Penry's done a book specifically about that set of runes. But yeah, so we get on to chapter 15, Christianising magic. And this goes into some of the incorporating some more of the old Anglo-Saxon gods with God or Jesus or the Holy Trinity. So you're petitioning both. Let's talk about fertility rites. Just after sowing your crops in at the end of summer, getting a priest to bless them. Using similar methods to someone more familiar with the old ways. And with this, there is also a charm formula. Just here. I won't read it out, but it's quite good. It's quite interesting how it goes and stuff. And I remember there being a sort of a bit someone taking the rip out of some spell, because it basically entailed someone giving this long speech about how they were them wanting to beckon in rain, and they gave this long speech before dumping a bucket of water on the ground, and that was basically the whole spell. And I do wonder if it was a Saxon spell, because they did have this long in some cases they did have a tradition of sucking up to the weather. They'd suck up to the weather, saying, you did brilliantly doing this thing before, there are all these times that you were really, really successful at doing this, we'd like you to do it again, and just in case you just so happen to have forgotten what you're doing, let me show you. And in the case with the bucket, they probably did all of that, We'd like you to rain, you've done it many times before, you've done it brilliantly, here are cases where you've done it before. In case you've forgotten how to rain, you do this. Bucket of water, empty it on the ground, We want you to make the ground wet so crops will grow. So yeah, that was. But within this there's a lot more with petitioning certain deities at certain times of the year, with moon phases and things to take into consideration as well. So there is a way of making your own spells in the Saxon way. And with that we get into the land charm, the land remedy charm, chapter 16. This has been referenced a few times before, but this is apparently quite a lengthy one to help fertility of crops. And you're meant to recite, the spellcaster is to recite lengthy parts of Latin, and I think this is meant to be done over about 3 or 4 days. A Latin incantation with tying things to a tree, putting 4 crosses marked with the names of the Gospels up, and then there's going into performing an actual spell that includes looking eastward, bringing God specifically into it, the saintly Mary, guardians of the celestial realm, recognising the earth as holy, as sort of a sacred thing in itself, as if it was still under the domain of Mother Nature, an animistic sort of thing. And it goes on quite a bit, goes into some other parts of the spell, going into more detail about what the poem actually meant, what this verse here actually meant. I was quoting from that. But here we go. Yeah, going into more detail about what some more of the extending the verse that I mentioned earlier, and going looking at what these mean, these extensions mean. Other land charms. There are sometimes links with Woden. It explains 9 herb charm, and they go into mentioning each of the herbs, saying what they are good for, saying you're brilliant at doing this, add that to the mix, and so on. A snake came sneaking, it slew a man. Then Woden took nine glory twigs and struck the serpent so that in 9 parts it flew. Again the magic number 9 and a mention to Woden. Mentions to dragons again and serpents. They're also being a sort of a form of Ouroboros, and how that's significant. Symbols, words and other magical methods. You find some parts of some more verses here about specific things. Which appealed to what seemed to be pagan powers. Was it to take earth with your right hand, throw it under your right foot, and say that verse? Yeah, and it's we go into other forms. It explains about the powers that be, and you take up you having a basic choice of either flattering that power or threatening it, which is going into what I was saying about, you've been good at doing all this before, can you do it again please? Names and words of power. Which would have been a popular component in ancient times. Magically speaking, if you name something, you claim authority over it, which makes it particularly useful in healing spells. Yeah, there's charms about several other things. Charms, but the power in the charms, but these have often been overlooked and even mistaken for gibberish. In fact, they are nothing of the sort. Although a few may have become unintelligible with the passage of time, I suspect others may be disguised. If we name something in a way that only we can understand, then magically we are concealing its power while maintaining our own. This technique is particularly useful when dealing with another hostile magician. And we go into magic symbols. Some example uses of some of the stuff just here. Right, and examples of some grids used for spell work, just here at the top of this page. Other magic methods. Charms often recommended subjecting sick patients to physical violence, such as scourging. In fairness, such methods are found in many other periods and cultures too. I know in some folklore that's a popular way of getting the Fae to return your child should you find that they are a changeling. You subject them to physical violence in the hope that they turn back into your actual child. And it's you might not be able to do that today. I think, yeah, especially when some of the folklore the folk tales are suggesting things like you turning the oven on full temperature and putting your child in there. And you're probably having to repeat that over and over again for most of an afternoon. Nowadays you might get a visit from the police and friendly people in a white van that give you a very pleasant huggable jacket. So I wouldn't exactly recommend using physical violence to get your kid back should you find it is a changeling. If you do find that your child is a changeling, I believe there are riddles that you can find to test them with, to befuddle them and confuse them into exchanging themselves, to confuse the changeling into returning themselves and exchanging themselves for your actual child once they get back to fairyland. So yeah, it's better to do the riddles than, yeah, people don't normally find putting children in ovens a good idea today, so don't do that. Well, yeah, it's sorry. Oh, pardon me. Not the virus. Yeah, that cough wasn't the virus. But yeah, so we get into a lot more other things. A lot more charm use. Running water shows the charm was performed out of doors, so that when the patient declared, "Take this evil thing and move away with it," the scabies was magically transferred into the water and removed both with the patient and her community. There is stuff to do with, there's stuff like that in the book. The spells and the body, singing over certain parts of the body. The right side of the body was not as popular as the left side for charm work. Doing special times of day. Sometimes certain moon phases are specified. Sometimes spells had to be performed before the moon appeared in the sky, either after sunset or before moonrise. Goes into there being several different times of day normally specified, and one book is that's good for herbal charms is the Leech Book of Bold. I'll try and show it. So, Leech Book of Bold. There we go, Leech Book of Bold. That's one of the original texts. This has a lot of Anglo-Saxon medicinal sort of stuff in. So if you can get a copy of that. I think there were 3 main books that I found, that being one of them. One I think could be quite easily got as like a PDF or off Amazon or something. And the others were almost non-existent. I think one could be got as a very rare book from a university press that cost lots and lots, hundreds of pounds. But as we go on, there is a charm against elf disease, which they examine in more detail. Making herbs up into drinks, and there is also the just as so may formula, which sort of goes into just as I burn this piece of wood, so may the fever be burned out of the patient. That being given as an example, and that goes into stuff a bit more. It's pardon me going to sneeze. We have a big poem here, just on a page opposite. A bit starting about the importance of water, and I quite like the role of, it's called the role of water. I think water can be quite important, and as it washes away so much. Most bodies of water have their own spirit associated with them, so there's a bit of spirit work as well as water being used, the actual water itself being used. The importance of running water, Christian christenings being used as an example. And then we get on to magic lines. To draw directly around the disease or the patient. A charm against I can't read that. Erysipelas. I've lost where it is on here. There we go. Around there you'll see Erysipelas. I'll call it that from now, Erysipelas, and it being about take a green stick and have the man sit in the middle of the floor of the house and make a stroke around him. Stroke as in, like with a stroke of the pen. rather than stroke as in, yeah. There's stuff to do with the type of tree is not specified, and the green stick is probably a length of wood cut off a living tree. So that there is power in the fact that it is green, the fact that it is green and full of sap and alive is more important than what type of tree it is, say oak, rowan. Yeah, it's yeah. It's like whether it is alive that is of importance. Yeah, and it goes into what magic lines can be used for, formulas to be said while tracing around swellings. Fug diabolus Christus te sequitur, quando natus est Christus fugit dolor. Had to be recited. And it goes on, focusing on the numbers divisible by 3, 6, 9 and 12. So things being repeated that many times being important. And then we go into magical thinking. And the Leech Book of Bold, the Old English Herbarium and Lusnunga are texts mentioned here as the main surviving texts. And we have a bit of a poem which is a part of a charm against cysts. The written version dates from the late 11th century, so roughly about the time of the Norman conquest. And we go on, the poem gets broken down into sets of lines. And that's used as an example to show how like a poetic formula can be made, a spell can be made, broken down into those parts. And there's other ways of considering making charms. There's also using intimidation in magic. You might try threatening a stitch to leave a person, giving a few herbs to go with it. There being some of the like deities in this case that I've got in front of me. Wayland the Smith is mentioned, and his was it being pierced by his spear. 6 smiths sat, war spears that they wrought, out spear, not in spear. And it's to get rid of a stitch. And then we go on to numbers and elves. And we go into how the number 3 was important and gets carried over into the 3 wise men, the 3 Marys, the 3 denials of Christ by Peter, 3 days between Christ's crucifixion and resurrection, those being used as examples. How the number 3 goes before that with the weird sisters, and after that into the Middle Ages. When we look at the number 9, they also used the sign of the cross. There's also elves, alpha, elf, as they are in Old English, or elf in Anglo-Saxon, and Old Norse alpha, elfa, and Middle High German is alp. Elf, to the Anglo-Saxons, could be a generic term for a range of entities. And we go into other bits. There being wood elves, field elves, sea elves. Was it mountain dwelling or dark elves? There being several different types of elves, some of which corresponded with the Greco-Roman concepts of nymphs and dryads and things like that. That goes on. And elf being used in different names, like I mentioned, the Bishop Elfric, and how it was a bit ironic how he was a bishop complaining about heathen practices, yet he had a heathen name. And this goes into some of it's the Christian king Aethelwulf of Wessex chose Alfred for the name of his youngest son, and he became Alfred the Great. And it's get more of that, and then a little bit on plants. We're quite near the end. There's a bit on plants. Widespread connection to many cultures between apples, fertility, love and immortality. This is a whole section specifically about apples. There's mother dye plants. Which references the Lachnunga and the nine herbs charm again. With there being hawthorn as one of the mother dye plants. And a plant with the European nickname of devil's flower, devil's claw, witch's flowers, all suggesting that these had been demonised. And it does go into how the church had tried to ban a number of different plants, saying that their own medicines were even better, or why bother going to the doctors when you could get prayer from us? Yeah, and it seems a bit strange that. There's a reference to the Romans and the Celts, with their traditions overlapping, specifically with hawthorn growing among the Anglo-Saxons as it did among the Celts. There would have been similar practices. There's parsley as well, being one of these mother dye plants. Rosebay, willow, herb and red campion. And both being nicknamed the thunder flower, so likely having having a link with Thunor. And red campion being popular in Wales, meaning with the meaning of snake flower. You get demonised plants, of which wild clematis is one. And we go on. The church not particularly liking the use of those plants, as said before. And some plant remedies. The seeds of castor oil plant were valued for averting storms at sea. And there is a charm against water elf disease, which could apparently be diagnosed by the patient's livid fingernails, watery eyes, and a tendency to look downwards, recommends steeping various herbs in ale together with holy water, which may originally have been a dew. There are several mentions to the magical use of dew in this, and how it was replaced with the coming of Christianity with holy water. So in some of the older spells that you might find, please cross-reference it with some of the older texts, but if it is an old spell, you could swap out some holy water with dew. So I know a lot of people do that. There is also a bit on leeches, as in the little blood-sucking slug things. And there's the word leech turns up in place names as well. And there's a list of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different places that have leech in the name. And apparently the fourth finger on either hand next to the little finger, so this finger, was the leech finger. And there's use of that. Tylluan Penry gives her own experience of the leech finger. It's on both hands, so it's that finger that I'm wiggling there, or that one. And I quite like some of the names. Apparently that in Old English, that is it was ear cleaning finger, and it translates as ear cleaning finger, and in Old English it is ear cleaning finger. And it's sort of because you stick it in your ear to clean it. So in Old English it's the same as the English translation, and it's almost like a nickname sort of thing, because you use it to clean your ear out. Yeah, it sort of made me it's curious. And then we get onto a bit of an and finally, which is a bit of a conclusion that Tylluan Penry gives us, and then we get into a big list of sources, of which I'll let you read when you get the book. The venerable, there are several different beads given, several primary sources, secondary sources we get, taking up most of those 2 pages. So these are good if once you get past doing these, past reading this, if you decide to go into some other books. But you have a good few number of pages. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 pages worth of sources. There we go. And to conclude, this is a good beginner's guide that uses a lot of different sources. It's concise, gradually takes you through lots of different ways of thinking, how to consider the world, how to start off using charms, how to consider animism and things like that, how to look at, specifically in England, your surroundings, the landscape around you. This is a good start, and I think you could probably get quite a lot of information for your workings from this to begin with, and depending on whether you wanted to add to some of your workings, find a different angle to some of your workings, or probably even start some of your own, work out your own spells and workings yourself, whether it's wandering the countryside and your surroundings, finding your own sacred sites, little areas in woods or parks, little corners, little streams, and what to do with them. with different charms that you can use, different magical poems that you can recite over an illness, a bit of trouble over a little charm, and you could probably come up with quite a lot of stuff. If you were, yeah, quite a lot of modern, quite a lot of new things. You could come up with quite a lot of new things based on traditional ways that are more than 1,500 years old. So, yeah, with that, I'll say goodbye. I'll leave links to this book in the description below. Take a look, and I found this quite useful myself. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope I didn't butcher this review too much. It is the first review I've done. I wish you goodbye and good health. Bye bye everyone.